In 2000, PCPD was reorganized as a grant-giving foundation. It supported the efforts of partners that responded to various concerns, such as housing, waste management, food security, climate change, and reproductive health. In 2020, PCPD decided to shift from giving grants to becoming a social enterprise. It is studying the feasibility of setting up a hospital that would specialize on women's and children's health care, while at the same time provide a broad range of health services to the general public. As it continues to evolve, one thing has remained constant for PCPD. Through its various transformations, PCPD's commitment is to contribute to improve the quality of life of Filipinos. Initially known as the Population Center Foundation, the Philippine Center for Population and Development was created in 1973 to complement the government's National Population Program. In its first 26 years, PCF implemented projects that delivered information, training, and family planning services. In 1992, the foundation broadened its mandate from population to Population and Development, or PopDev, and it changed its name to the Philippine Center for Population and Development. As a PopDev organization, PCPD implemented projects on community-based health education and services, responsible parenthood, and adolescent development. In 2000, PCPD was reorganized as a grant-giving foundation. It supported the efforts of partners that responded to various concerns, such as housing, waste management, food security, climate change, and reproductive health. In 2020, PCPD decided to shift from giving grants to becoming a social enterprise. It is studying the feasibility of setting up a hospital that would specialize on women's and children's health care, while at the same time provide a broad range of health services to the general public. As it continues to evolve, one thing has remained constant for PCPD. Through its various transformations, PCPD's commitment is to contribute to improve the quality of life of Filipinos.
Okay, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Hi, welcome to the PCPD webinars and conversations. My name is Dr. Marilen J. Dangilan. I am the Executive Director of the Philippine Center for Population and Development. We have been holding a series of webinars on topics that our political leaders and the media don't usually talk about because they're not sexy. These topics range from nutrition, early literacy and learning disabilities, women's rights in BARM, in Muslim marriage and divorce with the speakers from BARM, to the 2022 DOH budget, and recently we're holding a series of webinars on climate change. Now, this morning, in partnership with the UN World Food Program in the Philippines, we have with us a sterling panel of speakers who will talk about social behavioral change. Dr. Martin Pareño, the moderator, will introduce you to them. For your information, by the way, just to let you know, the UN World Food Program is the world's largest humanitarian organization, saving lives in emergencies and using food assistance to build a pathway to peace, stability, and prosperity for people who are recovering from conflict, disasters, and the impact of climate change. For millions of people worldwide, and for us in this country, the WFP assistance is what makes the difference between life and death. So just to let you know, in 2020, the World Food Program was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war. By the way, this is the same award that was given to Maria Ressa. And so, this conversation is also mainstreamed, by the way, in the FP pages, in the Facebook pages of PCPD, the UP Center for Women and Gender Studies, Association of the Women and Gender Studies Association of the Philippines, and Angat Bayi. Before we proceed, just a couple of house rules. There's the Q&A that you can see. The Q&A session will come after the speakers have talked. Now, please use the chat box or the Q&A that you can see below. You don't have to raise your hands because we will not, we will disregard it. Okay, Dr. Martin Pareño?
Many thanks, Doc Marilyn, and good morning, everyone. Hey, this is Tuesday morning. And you know what, Doc Marilyn and the rest of the resource persons this morning had a very short talk about why do we need to do social and behavioral change communication. And there's a lot of interesting stories from there, but I couldn't wait for them actually to share their experiences as well. So, you know what, friends, improving health and nutrition of the community requires a lot or some level of behavioral change. And this could range actually from nudging a mother or a caregiver of a child to adopt healthier feeding practices for her baby, up to influencing the policymakers, food producers, and even the business establishments to support specific program and activities. And the SBCC, for the social and behavioral change communication, is just a piece of the puzzle for making these transformational and urgent changes possible. It is a set of communications and tools and activities to influence a behavior. However, SBCC is also less understood and can be regarded as an afterthought among strategic interventions. And this webinar will gonna unpack its potential and connect the dots for accelerating large-scale behavioral change. And that is the reason why we are having this webinar entitled, Why Do We Eat? What Do We Eat? And to formally welcome us all, I'll give to you the representative and country director of World Food Program Philippines, Dr. Brenda Barton. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone, guests and colleagues who are joining us today for this special event. And I would say it is a sexy event, Marilyn. It's called Why Do We Eat? What We Eat? And it's being held, in fact, on the first day of the Major Nutrition for Growth Summit in Japan. And this is actually the last of the three major summits that have been held this year. We had the Food Systems Summit for which we had some dialogues here in the Philippines leading up to the General Assembly in September. So a major global summit looking at from farm to fork. And then we had, of course, a climate change summit just last month. And all of these are very important and relevant to the discussion that we're going to have today. But first, I'd like to really extend my thanks to WFP's partner for this webinar, Dr. Marilyn, who is the executive director, as we know, of this amazing organization. Just so great to be able to partner with you. And I'm very excited to see that we have a number of participants who have joined us from various backgrounds. We've got many people, of course, from the nutrition community, specialists and key stakeholders. We've got government, both at national and local level, development partners, academia, private sector, and also, I think very importantly, media practitioners. So the question of what we eat and why we eat it is of great interest to us all. We eat every day, and we ask ourselves sometimes as well, what are we eating, and what is the reason behind that? And I feel that given the very worrying stagnant nutrition rates that we have here in the Philippines, rates that struck me when I arrived here in February, rates that haven't changed in decades, we have to really get under the belly of the problem. And especially now with the COVID pandemic, we know that nutrition issues have worsened even more in households, especially those who have been affected by the economic impact. So the question has been very much on my mind and my colleagues' minds on how to influence positive nutritious behaviors. And it really is one that is worth asking and that we're going to be discussing today. And it's one that is being discussed also elsewhere in the world. Really with the realization that traditional communication approaches have not been widely successful. To that end, I wanted to share that I've spent a large part of my career in WFP in the communications field. And I myself as a practitioner was using traditional means to not only communicate the work of WFP, but to also use it for programmatic purposes. But what I've learned about social and behavioral change communication, or SBCC as we call it, it really has opened up a world for me and a way that I've understood it's a game-changing approach, not just for nutrition, but for other areas as well. But our experts today on the panel will speak about that, and they'll also talk about the fascinating research that we've done here in the Philippines. But in short, really what SBCC is, it's grounded on this interplay of consistent messaging, cultural practices and activities all across various channels that will bring together positive attitudes and practices of the intended audiences. So it's really a process about how to unlearn and relearn positive behavior. And it really is relevant, of course, to the work that's being done here in the Philippines. If we just look at the National Food Policy and the key result area 6, ensure information, education, awareness, and people participation, communicating zero hunger. SBCC feeds into that. It's also linked to the Philippine Plan of Nutrition through the health and nutrition promotion activities. And I've been very happy to see that SBCC is a key part of the World Bank's new multi-sector nutrition project that's going to be implemented by the Department of Health and the Department of Social Welfare and Development. And lastly, leading us today, SBCC is part of the Philippines government's country commitment for the Nutrition for Growth Summit taking place in Japan, as I said, today and tomorrow. So as I turn back to Dr. Martin and others, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today, where we'll collectively, I hope, unpack the power and the value and the practical applications of SBCC and really look at how we can collaboratively, because it really is a collaborative approach if we're going to have impact, can work together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brenda. It's very exciting to listen to all of the things that you just mentioned. And I'm sure that our resource persons will be happy to share with us their experiences as well. And during the Q&A, definitely, you are free to ask your questions, particularly in how to implement social and behavioral change communication. So by the way, I'm Martin Pereño, the Program Policy Officer of World Food Program in the Philippines. So now let's go to our resource persons. The first speaker is Ms. Noor Abubakar, and we'll be talking about changing minds, shifting norms. She is our regional social behavioral change communication specialist based in the regional bureau in Bangkok, and she holds a master's degree in comparative social policy from Oxford University and a master's degree in public administration from Cornell University. She provides technical support and guidance to country offices in designing SVCC interventions in Asia and the Pacific region. Our second speaker is Dr. Ronald Del Castillo. He will be talking about the anatomy of targeted messaging, the Bambina experience, and other SVCC projects. Dr. Ronald is currently the social and behavioral change communication consultant of World Food Program Philippines and lead a project called Bambina, or also known as the Better Access of Mothers and Babies on Integrated Nutrition Agenda in Maguindanao. He is a clinical psychologist with a master's degree in public health from the University of California in Los Angeles and holds a doctor of psychology from Palo Alto University in California and was an associate professor at the College of Public Health at the University of the Philippines here in Manila. Our third speaker is Ms. Vicky Antoinette Luta, and she will be talking about a public relations and marketing communications perspective on SBCC. She is currently the head of Engaged Ian Manila, and she is a communications strategist, trainer, and seasoned business unit director for almost 15 years, and public relations and communications consultancy. She currently leads the business unit in Ion that specializes in advocacy, communications, public affairs, and government relations, research for communications, and branding. This is on top of the team's core expertise of corporate communications and crisis communications. And she has worked in a variety of clients from both the private and public sectors alike. And she holds a bachelor's degree in development studies from the University of the Philippines here in Manila. Without much further ado, I will give to you our speaker, Noor. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, and very warm welcome from Bangkok. And today I feel like as a trainer, it's very important to interact with the audience. And one thing I feel from the virtual world is that you just don't see your audience. So I think one thing I want to start out is like, since the topic is about why we eat and what we eat, let's start with people can put in their, what they ate for breakfast in the morning, and whatever they ate, they can write whether it is healthy or unhealthy according to them. Okay, let's see. It's like 9 o'clock. I'm sure some people are even having their breakfast while watching the webinar. So let's see how many of you write to us what you're eating. So maybe I can start if you want toast and egg. And if you can write if it is healthy. Okay, a lot of people are rice, egg, toast, just coffee, leftover. So not very, very, very healthy options here. Okay, I can see yogurt with fruits, but depends on how much. Okay, there's rice. Okay, interesting. So let me start my presentation. So I've also tried to customize the presentation in a way that it feeds into the topic today. So yeah. So as you know, Bangkok has now opened up, and I had the opportunity of going for something called the Monkey Festival. And I noticed that the monkeys were given like very healthy food, and at the same time, there was very unhealthy food. And I noticed that the monkeys were actually eating very healthy food. And whatever unhealthy or colorful items, they would just flip around and decide whether to eat it or not to eat it with suspicion, So I realized that, as humans, we are we are always trying to understand what is being fed to us and why we are eating. So eating what we eat is all about our mind. It's all about what we learn as children, how we grow up, what is the kind of food orientation that we get from childhood to adulthood, and how we transition from these various phases into what we eat. And And it also depends on the media. It also depends on several different factors that makes us choose what we choose. So you can see here, there was one picture that I got, which is like where, they're trying to flip around and see this colorful thing, but at the end of the day, they would choose the bananas. So I think that's where my next video will bring you to. It's about how our brain uses different shortcuts to decide why we eat what we eat. So I'm going to show you a quick video, and maybe after the video, I will pose some questions and then you can respond to it. Okay?
Fast and slow. There is a compelling drama going on in our minds, a film-like plot between two main characters with twists, dramas, and tensions. These two characters are the impulsive, automatic, intuitive System 1 and the thoughtful, deliberate, calculating System 2. As they play off against each other, their interactions determine how we think, make judgments and decisions, and act. System 1 is the part of our brain that operates intuitively and suddenly, often without our conscious control. You can experience this system at work when you hear a very loud and unexpected sound. What do? You probably immediately and automatically shift your attention toward the sound. That's System 1. This system is a legacy of our evolutionary past. There are inherent survival advantages in being able to make such rapid actions and judgments. System 2 is responsible for our individual decision-making, reasoning, and beliefs. For instance, imagine you're looking for a woman in a crowd. Your mind deliberately focuses on the task. It recalls characteristics of the person and anything that would help locate her. This focus helps eliminate potential distractions, and you barely notice other people in the crowd. If you maintain this focused attention, you might spot her within a matter of minutes. Whereas, if you're distracted and lose focus, you'll have trouble finding her. The relationship between these two systems determines how we behave.
So what do you think of that video?
This is Joe. Say hi, Joe.
Hi.
He's a project manager. A great one, I might add.
Yes, I am.
But he wanted to be greater. He just needed a new project management.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Any responses to this video? What did you think of it and in relation to food? You can put it in the chat. That's right. Yeah, I get one in response here, interplay between reasons and emotions. Yeah, that's right. Like, many of the times we know that in our subconscious mind, we know a Coke is unhealthy, but we still choose to have it because it's still not in our conscious mind. So we are still choosing, making decisions which are much simpler, which are easy. We don't want to take the effort. Okay, if Coke is available, I'll just go with the Coke. But I will not make that extra effort if I have to go a few shops down the road and buy the juice. So these are calculations that we make as humans, and we decide on the basis of what is most easily available to us. So food generally becomes, anything that is available to you at that point of time, we tend to eat that food. So sometimes you really need to make an effort to be healthy. And in these days, with the kind of atmosphere and the kind of grab foods and food that is available, we really have to make the effort. But the brain takes time to decide, and so it's not easy as a decision. For somebody to be healthy, it's not at all easy. So you have to make an extra effort. So as it says, the system 1 is all about impulses, habits, and beliefs. And system 2 is reflection, planning, problem solving. So behavior change as such takes a lot of time to move from the subconscious to the conscious. If I have to change my behavior from knowledge, first I improve my knowledge, then I change my attitude, and then I will change my practice, because I'm consciously now going to decide that I will only eat healthy, and even if I'm given the choice of an unhealthy option. So it's all about how much we can control our decisions and how fast we can make those decisions conscious. So it's not about just messages and messages are given out through media, through different platforms, but ultimately it is for us to decide whether we want to go with a bag of chips or we want to go with a bag of fruits, and the right fruits. So behavior change is all about decision making. So ultimately, even if we are doing a lot of messaging, ultimately the individual has to take the decision. The individual has to take a decision keeping in mind his family, his community, and everything around him. What is available to him, what is accessible to him, or in any way, what is within the household, how the systems and practices are happening, whether it is a household which has enough income to provide for every family member, or it's a household where there is not enough and very little to survive. So in those kinds of situations, decision making again becomes a very difficult task. So I have already touched upon it, that we always choose option there where we make less effort. So you always choose, okay, given the time, the requirement to cook something, to feed a child, we generally go with a processed food, which is much easier. So we try to make also our life easier with all these kinds of options that are available. Ultimately, yes, the time is what is required, and both, it is not just a woman's responsibility, but it is also a man's responsibility to make this a part of the household if you want to be healthy. So again, if you look at supermarkets around today, like the way it is structured, which is called choice architecture, and you will invariantly notice a lot of discounts, a lot of display of things like chips or drinks, which are always available at the right at the beginning, or somewhere where you are just going to enter, like there's a promotion going on. But much of the fruits, much of the healthier options tend to be expensive, and they tend to be right at the end of the supermarket, where you have to walk and make an effort. Now again, yes, somewhat things have changed during COVID, and there is an interest in more healthier options. So there are healthier options, but still they don't seem to be very economically available. So ultimately, it's like, okay, you make the effort to ignore these signs and go at the back of the alley and find the right food that you want, or you choose these 2 bags of chips or 2 bags of something which is not very healthy, and you take it home without making much effort to do the shopping. So it's all about our decision-making abilities to eat what we want to eat. So now I'll come to behavior change. So what I've been trying to touch upon in the past is that behavior change requires a lot of research, social behavior change communication, as it is called, and it is a field which is completely evidence-based. It is research-based. It needs to understand its audience to give you that change that it needs. So it is very target specific. So you have to work with a certain population to see the change, to see what are the, so if there is a community which has certain myths about, say, feeding a pregnant woman, which is actually affecting the nutrition of the mother and the child. So we need to work with this community, with that specific, to understand what are the various social, economic situation in that community, within the household, within the individual, and understand all the parameters to understand the target audience and design the communication according to it. And these communication also have to suit them. Do they have a mobile phone so that I can send some mobile-based communication? Do they have TV, media, so that they can have, different ways of listening to the same message, so that this message is going from the subconscious to the conscious? Are they able to discuss this message within their family? Are they able to discuss this message with the community? So I need to work with the community. I need to work with the family. I need to work with that individual to ensure that this, if I'm working with the mother, so if this mother needs the nutrition, then her husband, her entire family needs to ensure that that particular food is given to her, what is required for her full nutrition for her and her child. So I need to work. So if you see the circles in the presentation, there is the self. The self is the individual. The individual also needs to be motivated enough to actually change and ask for the right food. A lot of times there is, especially when it comes to women, the decisions are not made by them, but it's made by somebody else. So you need to have a lot of interpersonal communication, which is about family, which is spousal communication, maybe some family members who have an influencing impact on them. Then you have the community. You also notice that a lot of families will follow what the community decides. In certain countries, in certain societies, also about what the community or as a whole practices. So there are certain individuals in the community who can have an impact on the decisions that an individual makes or the family makes. And then you have the policy and the legislation. There are some issues which need policy influencing. There are some issues which need a certain policy change to ensure that this, what we are doing, needs to be practiced across. So like if there is a certain feeling that, that exclusive breastfeeding is something that is not practiced in the community. So the government can actually come up with the legislation with, to ensure that exclusive breastfeeding is a practice that is done by across all country, or in a way that it becomes like a social change. So that is where social behavior change communication is all about, bringing in the social change with the policy environment. So the policy advocacy factor is also necessary. Like if we are talking about for family planning, for example, and we say, okay, use these contraceptives, but the contraceptives are not available in the health system. So you have to create, so if there is supply, then only demand works. So for the demand and supply to work, you need to ensure that there is enough advocacy with the health system to ensure that those contraceptives are actually available with the health system so that the community can use it. So these are ways why it is called social behavior change communication, because behavior change communication is only about giving that message to the community, to the family, to the individual. And the social aspect of it is more for social change, which is more policy and more advocacy oriented. And you need to work with a lot of partners, you need to collaborate, you need to network to make sure that some things like these are successful and there is an alignment in the message that we are giving to our audience. And I will also mention now is that, we always say social behavior change communication, but over the years, given that the communication itself has, it's not just about communication we see that there is a lot of other areas that are influencing social behavior change. It's economics, there is a lot of understanding from the economics point of view, how individuals work, which a lot of private sector used to use it, like how they do these advertising, how they ensure that, there is a scale to whatever they're producing. So, the learnings from economics are now being applied to behavior change. There is, in the past, it used to be just community mobilization or interpersonal communication, but now there is a lot of ways, a lot of experiment that is happening in, it's not just about communication. There are various methodologies that you can use, from technology, artificial intelligence, do you name it? And there is a wide array of work. So it's not just about communication now. So it is also now being promoted as social behavior change, but with a collection of communication approaches and approaches that are adapted from economics, anthropology, psychology, and various other fields. And there is no magic bullet. Just because you are doing a behavior change communication doesn't mean that you're going to lead to a behavior change. There are several factors that are working within a household. That is, what is accessible in the market, what is available, the economic resources available to a family, what is the situation of the community. So there are several things that are working. So communication alone is not the solution to behavior change. So it needs to be an enabling environment. It needs to be an environment where this behavior change that we are talking about can be sustained over a period of time. So when we are just giving a poster or showing a poster or doing some kind of counseling, doesn't mean that that practices will be adopted. There are several situations of that individual that come into the whole decision-making paradigm. And then the individual decides whether it is possible to make such a decision. And as governments, that is the whole area where, you can come and ensure that there is an enabling environment for the people to make those right decisions. And I just want to show how this various stages of behavior change, as I said, it is a long process. So in a communication intervention, the first step of behavior change starts with awareness. And once we know from our research that there is a lot of awareness, then what is exactly the people need? The people need some specific knowledge or information on that specific topic, so that their knowledge level improves, so they understand if they do this, they will have this benefit. So you have to negotiate. You have to come to stages where you have to negotiate. You have to discuss the benefits. Only when people perceive the benefit or a risk of a certain situation, they will lead to a certain decision. So like wearing a mask, right, during COVID times, it's like, unless the individual perceives that risk, it's very difficult for people to wear the mask. It's become a big, a discussion topic, like how do you ensure people to wear the mask? So I think this is where my presentation is. I did want to share another video, but only if there is time. I'll just wait for.
Please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry.
Grammarly does more than catch errors. With Grammarly, you can find really good, no, perfect words that make your writing sharp, or explicit, or excellent, or distinctive. As a matter of fact, for what it's worth, Grammarly can.
This is a test of selective attention.
I would like you all to pay attention to this video, and there will be a question at the end of it. So please pay attention.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes.
How many of you got the 15 passes? And how many of you found the gorilla? Yeah. So what I wanted to get at is like, there is so much noise, there is so much going on, and to get the attention of a specific audience to something is so difficult, right? So when we have so many things going around, and to pay attention is so difficult. So you can imagine how difficult it is when you're going to the field with different messages, and how the audience has to find the right message and adapt it. So how we ensure coherence to the message is very important, and how we are able to capture the attention of the audience is very important in this kind of communication. I think I will stop with this video. I have another video, but maybe we can play it at the end.
All right, Dor, thank you so much for that. Is there anything else from your side?
Not much. And any questions, they can put it in the chat.
All right. Thank you very much, Noor. That was really very interesting. You started it off with a monkey eating a banana, and you ended it up with a gorilla playing basketball. But you know what? Yeah, the whole presentation of Noor was talking about SBCC as a whole, and what makes it different from the usual BCC. So there's a lot of things and learnings we got from Noor. Thank you so much for sharing that, Noor. So without much further ado, I would like to hand it over now to Dr. Ronald, who will be talking about the Bambina project. So from the SBCC, from the global perspective, we're going to zoom it in to what we did in Maguindanao. Doc Ronald, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I think one of the values that Noor just presented is sort of an overview of what SBCC is, sort of that system 1, system 2 thinking. What I'm going to do here is zero in on our experience with Bambina. I'll suggest a few SBCC projects that WFP has been involved in, but as well as other projects as well. SBCC, we're talking here about food and nutrition, but SBCC has been used in other countries as well related to food and nutrition. In Bhutan, they use SBCC as a way to create demand among school children. I think they were between the ages of 5 and 18 years old. This was a multi-year study, and from 2019, I think, to 2023, it's still ongoing. And what they wanted to do in Bhutan was, of course, address malnutrition, but specifically, how can we change the behavior of school children? So this was a large-scale study. The one in Ghana, in the middle of your screen, what they wanted to promote was what's called specialized nutritious foods, or SNFs. And they use SBCC to make the community be more accepting and welcoming of this particular food. It also used SBCC to encourage people to seek health services and to promote overall improved behaviors regarding food and nutrition. And so what they did was, in addition to posters and flyers and brochures, which you and I might consider more around IEC materials, they also created manuals for health workers on how to communicate with their participants regarding improving their health-seeking behaviors, including food and nutrition. And as Noor pointed out, one of the important things that Noor pointed out was this was not just, of course, the flyers and the brochures, but this was really multi-level, multi-sectoral approach. They did home visits, they did cooking demonstrations, they did radio discussions. This is, again, the project in Ghana. The one in India was also very large scale, huge, national, regional level. One of the things that I also addressing malnutrition, but one of the things that I really enjoyed in reading this particular example of SBCC is they use puppets. So what they did was they got a puppet and a ventriloquist to perform essentially theater performance in health centers. And it encouraged children as well as their caregivers to be excited about certain kinds of foods. And so again, another opportunity to use not just communication, but to realize that there are many forms of communication. One being the puppet theater. I know we're talking here about food and nutrition, but SBCC has been used in other fields as well as an evidence-based tool. The WHO regional office in Europe has used a series of communication tools to address pandemic fatigue around COVID. I'm sure you and I here have been experiencing for the better part of the last 2 years. It's been used in Indonesia to increase condom use and to practice safer sex among sexually active youth in Indonesia. They used mass media, especially TV, for targeting youth. SBCC has been used regarding conversations around suicide among military veterans. And so they use communication strategies by training military leaders. How do you communicate and talk about mental health and mental well-being among your vulnerable population in a way that is supportive, in a way that's non-judgmental, in a way that generates emotions, which Noor underscored earlier. So again, mental health as a component of that. And lastly, and as an example, this study is actually kind of relatively old. It's 20 years old. This was done here in the Philippines. It used a combination of interpersonal and mass media approaches to promote family planning and other reproductive health skills. What they did was they used 8 television spots here in the Philippines. This was a long time ago. They used doctors and nurses to talk about these kinds of things. I'm sure we still see these kinds of TV ads, if you will, or TV spots. But one of the things they also included was a TV spot where they focused on the men. They had carpenters, drivers, janitors, vendors, factory workers in a group discussion. And this was in a video talking about family planning. And they did a post-test or an evaluation of what it was like for people to be exposed to these TV spots. And they showed an increase, not only awareness of contraceptive use among those who were exposed to that particular TV spots, they were also notice increased use in contraceptive as well. So just to highlight that, I know we're talking about food and nutrition, but SBCC has been used in many multiple areas as well. So for our Bambina project, a central question for us was what kinds of communication tools and approaches and activities do we use to effectively influence the behavior of our target groups. And we had 9 target groups, primarily pregnant and lactating women, mothers of children under 5, and women of reproductive age. We had other target groups, and I will highlight those. But again, just to underscore what Noor said, that this SBCC is a piece of the puzzle, right? There are other things that we need to consider, including policy issues, including enabling environment, access to foods, so forth and so on. But SBCC as an important piece of that puzzle is what I'm going to highlight here. For our project, we focused on malnutrition in Maguindanao. Many of you here are in the field. You know, I'm preaching to the choir. You know very well that Maguindanao has a chronic and substantial public health problem regarding malnutrition, around stunting, around underweight, and around wasting relative to the rest of the country. So anemia is a public health problem in the region there as well. That, if you can think of the underweight, the stunting, and the wasting, or the malnutrition component as a whole, as a health outcome, if you can step back a little bit, and again, SBCC highlighting the social component, if you can step back a little bit, if these are the health outcomes, understand that in the context there in Maguindanao, even the affordability of energy-only diets, it can be a struggle for many households. So a small number of households in Maguindanao, or in the country as a whole, excuse me, are not able to afford energy-only diet. But if we talk about nutrition or nutritious diet, a large number of Filipino households, about a third, cannot afford a nutritious diet. About a third of Filipinos' households cannot afford a nutritious diet. And a sizable number of that 1/3 are found in Maguindanao and in BARM in general. So our objective, or our hope through the use of SBCC, was to address, to play our role in addressing the malnutrition in the region. So I'm going to highlight here precisely what Noor had spoken about earlier. We did a formative research. We started data collection a year ago in November of 2020. We did a series of surveys, focus group discussions, as well as one-to-one interviews, in addition to desk review. Whatever the message that we will develop later on, as Noor highlighted, was going to be based on the evidence. So we went to 4 municipalities in Maguindanao. As I highlighted, we had 9 target groups. In addition to what I'd spoken about earlier, we had addressed, our target groups included adolescents, male influencers, which could be the spouses or an elder, the eldest son in the household. We also targeted caregivers. So this could be your in-laws or the grandparents. And then we also had key stakeholders. So decision makers, health workers. We spoke to mayors as part of our target groups. And taken together, we wanted to understand not only food and nutrition preferences, their behaviors, their decision makings, their food habits in the households. We want to understand their relationship to multiple channels. Did they use YouTube or social media in general? Did they listen to the radio? And this information was used to generate specific thinking, feeling, and doing, or nudges that we can use to create a message around, so that then we can develop an SBCC campaign in the future. And as highlighted by Noor, absolutely throughout the process, we had a series of early discussions with the Integrated Provincial Health Office and other local stakeholders and partners down there in Maguindanao and in BARM. And later on, we had a series of consultations at the regional, national, and international level. About 30 or so experts we convened together and asked them about our messages and our data. So just to highlight our experience again, as you can see here, this is one of our data collection. You can imagine this was during COVID, so you can imagine what that was like for our team. There were a series of, we wanted to do, for example, focus group discussions on pregnant women, which would have been a more efficient way of data collecting. But during the time, pregnant women were not allowed to gather together and be outside their homes at the time. So some had to be interviewed individually as a way to get into that data. You can see here that our team really took advantage of what's available to them given the conditions on the ground. We use the van as a whiteboard, getting into this data. So our team really worked hard to gather that data for Bambina. Once we had that data, right, formative research, right, is the core of SBCC. Once we got that data, the team sat together in a strategic planning to analyze what are the issues around this particular target group. So mind you, we had 9 target groups. So each group had to be analyzed in terms of the communication issues within that particular group. So as you can imagine, if you do a root cause analysis of pregnant women, for example, there are many root cause analysis of why the experience of pregnant women might lead to childhood malnutrition. But for our purposes and for the purposes of SBCC, we wanted to pick at those issues where a health communication can then be generated and therefore develop at a later time. Each target had an audience profile, meaning the team sat together and talked about essentially a psychographic, right? What are the needs, the hopes, the dreams, the feelings of this particular group? And we decided early on that our messaging was going to be one of hope, one of joy, and one of optimism. That whatever the behavioral thing that we were going to try to encourage these target groups to change or to do, that it was going to be this in this umbrella of feeling, right? Going back to Nora's excellent presentation, generating that feeling, and that feeling was going to be, yes, I can do this. Yes, this is fun. Yes, we can do this together. Each target group was then had their own creative briefs. The creative briefs was really developing not only the thinking, doing, and the feeling, the specific behaviors we wish to change, but crafting specific message concepts for each target group. So the team, in a series of consultations, again, with the 30 experts or so over a series of 2 or 3 meetings, we wanted to know, what is the tagline? What is the message for this particular group? Again, based on the evidence that we found. There are 9 target groups. I'm not going to go over each of the 9 target groups, but just to illustrate our point, I'm going to give an example of one of the target groups, which is the mothers of children under 5. Among mothers, among MU5s, we found out that in their household, the mothers tended to give a limited variety of foods to their children. And the second point, which is what you see there on the left side of your screen, we found out that for some mothers, it was difficult to navigate interpersonally how to say no or to disagree with other people in the household. For example, in the evidence that we found, many of the mothers believed one thing, which could be healthier or helpful for their particular child, maybe because a health worker told them about that thing that they should be doing. But that is coming up against a barrier, which is, oh, my mother-in-law says this, my grandmother says this. So the interpersonal emotional conflict this mother is experiencing is, if I know this one thing, but I'm hearing this other thing from my mother or mother-in-law or whoever, what do I do? Right? There's the emotional conflict that the health communication will try to unpack and then hopefully lead to behavior change in the longer term. Each target group had a preferred channel. And for this particular group of MU5s, radio was definitely a key channel. In fact, we found out in our data that for the families and households in Maguindanao, a sizable number listened to the radio. I think over 60% of our participants listened to the radio. However, a much lower number, only around 20% of our target participants reported that they heard any sort of food and nutrition related information on the radio. So think about that for a second. Yes, many of us listen to the radio, but we don't really hear a lot of food and nutrition related information on the radio. And that gap right there highlights an opportunity for us, right? Which means we need to do more radio related messaging for this particular group. And lastly, the message concepts, again, developed by the team in consultation with 30 or so experts. our messaging was that, yes, it's challenging to feed your child, but we can see it as a teaching moment. Now, the message concept, I want to be clear here, is not necessarily the message you will hear on the radio or on social media, but it is the umbrella sort of theme that we want to come across in whatever channel that is ultimately chosen to communicate a particular message. And so what we had done was, so we did this for each target group. We did the thinking, doing, and the feeling. We created a template, which is what you see on the right of your screen. Right? So this is not necessarily the image you will see on a poster or a brochure or a TV ad, but we wanted to create a template that we can use as a basis for content development later on with a media organization, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So the thinking and doing and the feeling that you see on the left side of your screen are the behaviors we wish to change, we wish to track based on our evidence with this particular group of people, using the message concept I talked about earlier with the creative illustration, the visual material that you see on the right side of your screen. We did this for all the target groups, and each target group had their own sort of outcome as part of our evaluation plan. So for example, in the next 3 months, people who are, or in this case, mothers of children under 5, who are exposed to a particular key messages, they will recall at least 3 of those messages. And then as you can see, medium term and longer term. We did this, each target group, and we had 9, had their own outcomes that we wanted to evaluate. So this is just an overview of what I've spoken here. How can we strategically use data, evidence that we had collected through the desk review, focus group, and interviews and so on, by influencing the behavior of our target groups? Our primary target groups are the light blue that you see in the middle of your screen, the pregnant lactating women, the MU5s, and the women of reproductive age, with a hope that their knowledge, attitudes, and practices will also improve over time. So this is just a sort of a framework that we had eventually developed based on our evidence. As you can see here, it might be small in your screen, so I apologize. But again, this is just to highlight that each of our target groups eventually had their own message concept, had their own visual material, had their own psychographic, had their own health communication issue that we wanted to address. And these are the illustrations that we wanted to convey to you today. You can see the adolescents on the left side of your screen. We divided them between boys and girls because we decided, based on our evidence, that each was going to have their own separate communication. For example, we decided a possible communication tool is to use your hand as a dancing something in a TikTok video, for example, right? Again, just to illustrate that we each had different message concepts per target group. So where are we now in terms of our SBCC work? Once we gathered all that data, developed the concept, the psychographic, and all these kinds of things, as Noor pointed out earlier, absolutely, we went back to the field. We went back to pre-test the material and essentially ask our target audience, a different set of target audience, right? Different set of pregnant lactating women and so on. And we wanted to see, did you understand this message, right? Is this attractive to you? You know, what can we change? What can we do better based on this picture and this image that you see before you? All of that taken together, we develop a strategic and action plan, including capacity strengthening. We've gone back to help a small set of our stakeholders learn how to run an SBCC campaign. That is part of our strategic and action plan that we had drafted in late August. Right now, we are in the middle of, and this will segue into our next speaker, Vicky. Right now, we are developing an implementation strategy, as well as a media landscape analysis. A media landscape analysis will help the team decide sort of whether or not, in terms of the media, is it an enabling environment down there in Maguindanao? And so we're working with a media group to help us come up with that strategy, as well as develop the actual content later on. Right. So remember, all that message and evidence and data we have gathered, it needs to be developed into an actual content, into an actual Facebook something, YouTube something, radio something, or whatever. And we're going to need a media and creative team to partner with in order to do that. And this month, as well as next month, we have an excellent opportunity to also learn more about the experiences of Indigenous people. So we're going to go back to the field, do the exact same thing with the exact same target groups, but this time among IPs in Dato Abdullah Sanki to understand a little bit more the nuance of their own particular experience and see if our strategy that we had developed in late August needs to be tweaked, needs to be changed based on the specific needs of IPs. All of that together, we are hoping that next year you'll be seeing in your screen, if you live in Maguindanao, a radio ad or a TV ad or a cooking demonstration of some kind that we have developed together as a team in our SBCC project. So let me end with key takeaways here. I'd just like to highlight that absolutely SBCC is an evidence-based approach that requires many people, not just the research team, but many partners from the very beginning in terms of generating that evidence. And I think Noor had alluded earlier that this requires a commitment because behavior change takes a long time. It takes a long time to change behavior. So this research has been going on for over a year now, and we're still only developing the content itself. The campaign is yet to be rolled out, so that's another year or so, right? So to me, it requires really a long-term commitment. Number three, simple nudges, simple suggestions is easier to do, but better still, if we generate emotions, right? The top-down approach, which is really more of what health education and IEC does, is I'm the expert, I tell you what to do, right? It's a very top-down approach. SBCC is a bottom-up approach, and therefore generating those emotions is crucial for changing the behavior down in the community. And lastly, SBCC is certainly about understanding that information, which is why it's very circumscribed. Information is, we understand it based on context and culture and in our network. So what people understand in Maguindanao might be different than what people understand in other parts of the country. And that's why SBCC needs to be very context specific and community specific. So that is our experience with Bambina. Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Martin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ronald. It was very interesting. And to our colleagues who are listening right now, you can just see that even changing the behavior of only one person, say for example, a pregnant mother or lactating mother, takes a lot of time and efforts. You can see that you need to also influence 9 other people around her, like her husband, the mother-in-laws, of course, the advocacy makers, etc., etc. So this is what we call the syndicated messaging, actually, and it really takes some time. But as mentioned by Dr. Ronald, it is always built on emotion, and the simpler, the better. But I think the deeper analysis is being done. It is better as compared to just making it simple. So let's move to our next presenter to talk about the public relations and marketing communications perspective on SBCC. Ms. Vicky, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Just a minute. Okay, just checking if the screen is okay and my voice is okay.
It's okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to have been invited to this session this morning. Very honored to have the opportunity to actually share our experience in doing communications, including supporting SBCC. So I've been tasked today to talk a little bit about public relations and the public relations and marketing perspective on SBCC. I've had the chance to work on a few SBCC projects, and one thing that actually that we've observed for all these projects is that it's not an immediate process, no? Like what Noor mentioned and Dr. Ronald mentioned. It takes time. And behavior, especially one that's influenced by a lot of factors, some overwhelmingly deep or overwhelmingly big or deeply rooted, takes a long time to change. And the best thing to do is really to take it one step at a time, no? And break down the goals into smaller goals or objectives. And that's how we try to support also these projects. So we've seen, as an agency, EON is a communications firm, so we do examine a lot of communication frameworks, and part of this would be the various SBCC frameworks, or similar to what Noor mentioned earlier, no, the image on the right. So we've seen several frameworks for behavior change, but considering that I've been tasked to talk about the PR and marketing perspective, I thought the figure on the left would be sort of close to the consumer journey that's usually used in marketing communications. I won't explain comprehensively the figure on the left. Most of you might have seen this, no? But my point really for including the figure is that just like in a consumer journey process, what we've learned is that it's important to have strategies and tactics at every point of the journey. So from pre-contemplation, there should be a specific goal there, a specific strategy, and specific tactics. The same for contemplation, for the next step, until the next step, until the next step. So the goals, the strategies, the tactics could either, for example, improve knowledge, encourage action, or regularly reward action to maintain behavior. What makes SBCC a little more, in a way, complicated is that because we're not just, unlike a regular publicity or a public relations or a marketing campaign, we're not just selling a product or just looking at one individual, like what was emphasized earlier by the other speakers. We are looking at a whole community, for example, and enabling an environment to enable a change to happen. No? Um, those surrounding factors also influence individual behavior. We know that while an individual, for example, may realize that they want to change, but if the surrounding environment, for example, does not support this change, it will be difficult for that individual, or that the change that the individual wants to happen, to happen. No? Uh, but I wanted to sort of look at our recent experience in the pandemic. No, so I think there are some learnings that we can get, and this is our recent experience in improving vaccine confidence. I know it's not nutrition, but there are some things there that I think that we could pick up and possibly apply for a nutrition specific SBCC campaign. So as I know, the economic impact, the lockdowns, the job losses may have definitely played a part, but in improving vaccine confidence in the Philippines, or you can look at it as addressing vaccine hesitancy, there were also a lot of communications and engagements initiated across sectors, that in a way, from my point of view, were actually quite unprecedented. So as I'm sure some of you might be familiar with the vaccine perception in the Philippines. At some point a few years ago, vaccine confidence actually deteriorated. No, and so come the COVID-19 pandemic, when we started talking about the value of vaccine and how it can actually help resolve the pandemic, there was a lot of hesitancy. Actually, almost, I think, a majority 80 to 90% of the population actually did not want to get vaccinated. So that was a big problem for us when we have this possible solution, but a majority of our population actually did not want to get vaccinated. So of course, the government started with the with the education and communication effort, but eventually there was really an integrated effort with the various sectors. There was a close partnership with the public and private sector, no, and that was one of the key things that I saw that could be helpful also in an SBCC campaign, an integrated effort and support across sectors. What we saw for this particular effort for building the vaccine confidence, there was public and private sector coordination, and also there was unprecedented cooperation of big brands in the country. What happened also was that because there was integrated effort, there was recognition of the various campaigns that were being done. So, for example, for the government, I think it was called BIDA. There was recognition that it was going to be focused on a particular portion of the population, and then the private sector came in to focus on another sector of the population. But we all had one key message, no? We had an overall key message, and there were, of course, supporting messages to that we just tweaked according to the audience that we were talking to. So there was that integrated effort really to make sure that the messages that were delivered to the various audiences were as much as possible aligned. Also, there was a pool of experts that was trained for public engagement. So definitely we've been talking about the need to have experts really lead the conversation about vaccines, about science. But there was also a need for them to be able to talk to the public so that they could be understood, so that they could address the concerns, the issues that the public might have about the vaccines. Dr. Ronald mentioned earlier about emotions. No? So we also had to train this pool of experts to recognize, to acknowledge the emotions when talking to the audience, because that actually could be the source of the hesitation. No? So these pool of experts, some of them actually were from the government, but also a lot of them were also from the private sector. So these experts, who after they were trained, they were then assigned, for example, one was a better fit, for example, for radio. So any radio interviews, that person would be the one doing the interview. And then there was one person that was more fit, for example, for TV. There was one person that was very good in, for example, Facebook live streams, no, could really answer questions, the most simple questions that were repeated, so that person had a lot of patience. So there was a deliberate attempt to identify which talking head, which spokesperson would best fit a particular platform. The third thing that we observe really is presence in several platforms, and the various approaches also in communication. So there was really an effort to fill all possible communication platforms, both by government and the private sector and the other sectors involved, no, NGOs. So that included traditional media. So that would be newspapers, TV, radio, but also really thinking about the platforms where people are getting information. So social media, so that included Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, no, and also the messaging apps, Viber. A lot of information actually are circulated in Viber groups and the small family groups, for example. And I'm sure you might have experienced that as well, no? So you get a message from your uncle or your auntie forwarding sort of like a message about a vaccine. So there was also a need to have content that would be easily shareable in these messaging platforms, no? In terms of various approaches, of course, there was also a need to make sure that there would be content that would be easily readable, but also content that will be engaging, um, uh, and also content that would allow for an audience to actually ask questions. So this could be what we call static content. Those are just pictures with words. We have dynamic content, which could include video, and then we also have the more engaging, like the Facebook live stream that what was mentioned earlier. Of course, this includes as well the direct engagements with the stakeholders, the use of the platforms, traditional and social media is just one part of it, but there is also a need for that direct engagement. And while we couldn't do face to face, it was the arrangement of Zoom briefings where we allowed, for example, people to actually ask questions. No, so those sort of substituted that direct engagement. Another thing that really sort of increased in during the pandemic is engagement of micro influencers. So you might have heard about the term influencer. So those are the people that are very well known, for example, in various social platforms. But there are also what we call micro influencers. So these would be people that might not have a lot of following, but they do have deep engagement with their followers. They could be well known, for example, in a specific geography or a specific profile of the population. Um, they are basically what we call people like me, people like you know. So people who you can easily relate to. They could be someone like your auntie, your uncle, your cousin. So these micro influencers are individuals also who can be recruited to help cascade the message, you know? And some of these micro influencers actually could, for example, have a lot of following in TikTok but not so much in Instagram, or could have a lot of following in YouTube, but not so much in another platform. So it's really looking at the geography, for example, where you are, and looking at the micro influencers in that area. One thing also that I think really helped push for the vaccine confidence was the support of big institutional champions. So, like I mentioned earlier, there were a lot of national corporations and brands actually that participated in that integrated campaign. But also there was a lot of support as well from the big tech companies, the platforms, the likes of Facebook and Google. They actually donated some credits, for example, for use in pushing the information and the campaign for vaccine confidence. So that is also an opportunity or a possible partnership that we can think about specific for nutrition SBCC. But one thing also, apart from all this communication, like what we said, it's not communication is only one part of it. There has to be an enabling environment, and for the vaccination effort, there were clear next steps. So there were action points for the individuals, but also it was very clear what they needed to do. No, they had to go to register for vaccination, consult with their LGU, and then they had their vaccination schedule. So and access also was quite easy because vaccination centers were nearer, for example, to your residence. So there was that. Another part of it was that there was immediate and long-term incentives. No, so for example, some of the private sector partners actually really thought about how to encourage vaccination. So apart from just give the government giving perks to those who are vaccinated, the private sector partners also provided discounts, for example, for meals. So those were the more short-term incentives or rewards or perks, no, or discounts or for a leisure activity, for example. So having those rewards and perks, a short-term reward but also a long-term reward, allowed for people to actually really see to see the value of the vaccination, apart from also seeing the actual result of the vaccination. So there was a reduction in the number of cases. Um, like I mentioned, while this isn't really for nutrition, there are these 5 things actually are practices that perhaps we can consider for a nutrition specific SBCC campaign. Now, I mentioned about TikTok, and this is really one of the fastest rising sort of content in social media. The format of TikTok, which is short videos, very entertaining. We can see that Instagram actually followed it already with their version of it called Reels. So and the examples I've noted here, these are some of the micro influencers that have really grown their following in TikTok now. So there's a lot of doctors actually in TikTok who provide educational information, and there's a hashtag in TikTok called Health Talk. I tried to actually look for nutrition specific influencers there, and there wasn't really a lot. There were parang dietitians or nutritionists, but I think they were targeting the more A and B market. I think there is an opportunity here to tap influencers or develop influencers, micro influencers that could target the other portions of the population. So one RC Larga is a pharmacist actually who gained really some influence in TikTok as well. So he also shared his COVID his journey for vaccination. Now the other 2 examples here aren't really related to COVID vaccination, but I wanted to share them because they could be examples of micro influencers. So there's this one teacher, Carl Angelo Halon. So I think he works for DepEd, but in his TikTok, he actually shows his home visitation efforts. No, so as we know, DepEd actually goes to the different homes to do home visitation, and he actually showed this to show the efforts of DepEd. On the other hand, the Asian Parent is a parent specific media platform. With 66,000 followers. So they have a lot of information for mothers. They have information for nutrition of the baby. So they're really targeting the parents. So they are also a possible partner, a media partner also, if we want to consider TikTok or like the digital platform. So the Asian Parent is purely a digital platform. So one thing also that I wanted to highlight is that echoing what the other speakers mentioned, no, communications planning should be evidence-based, especially SBCC. We need to have a good understanding of our target audience, what's their current perception, what's their current knowledge, also who are the influencers that help influence their decision. Trying to we need to understand and determine the information type that we need to deliver, and also the messages that they'd want to hear, and also determining the source of information, and not just any source of information, but the trusted source of information. So in line with this, EON recently actually launched its I think 5th or 6th iteration of the Philippine Trust Index. And I was thinking maybe the results of that research, we just recently launched it, I think November. So early part of November. So I wanted to share some of the results there because I thought the results actually might help validate some of the for example, the research of Bambina, and also something for us to think about when we're starting to develop also our SBCC campaign. So what we found out, so the Philippine Trust Index measures the trust rating of 6 institutions in the Philippines. So apart from that, we also try to determine the drivers of trust for this particular institution. So the 6 institutions are church, academia, media, government, NGO, and business. And we see here that in terms of trust rating, the church and academia really has high trust. No, from 2017 to 2021, for the 3 iterations here, the trust rating for church and academia is really high. So what does that mean for us? If we are looking for possible talking heads, no, or influencers, then definitely we can consider the church, the leaders in the church, or perhaps a representative of the academe as a trusted source of information. Media, we see that there was an increase in trust in 2021. Government, almost the same. For NGO, however, there was a drop in 2019, but now there was an increase in 2021. The reason really, we think that there is an increase in the trust rating. It's because during the pandemic, the NGOs actually were on the ground to really move to help fill the gap on the ground as well. So I think that's why the trust rating there increased. On the other hand, for business, the trust rating decreased, most likely because there was a lot of they had to let go of some people because of the impact to the business. Another thing that I wanted to show is the trust rating according to the geographic area, since we are talking about the impact of having specific strategies for specific areas. We see that for the church and academe across the different areas, they both have high ratings. No, so wherever you are in the Philippines, if you might want to consider engaging someone, a representative of the church or a representative of the academe as part of your pool of experts or champions or talking heads to talk about nutrition. In terms of trust in NGOs and in business, for trust in NGOs, we see that there was an increase across all geographic areas. For Metro Manila, from 39 to 77, North, South Luzon, Visayas, and even Mindanao. No? So NGOs could again serve as a good a trusted talking head. No? For trust in business, we saw that there was a decrease across all areas. In terms of the trust and societal leaders, the leader that had the highest trust rating was religious leaders, followed by journalists or media professionals, and then the third were government leaders, the local leaders, followed by the national leaders, and then we have the fifth with scientists or medical professionals, and then people in my local community also is in the top 6. So definitely, if we can find influential community leaders, they can be good champions as well. My employer is 7th, and then business leaders is last. In terms of media channels, this validates that definitely TV and radio are still the top trusted media channels now. And one reason for that is that because it's visual, for radio, for TV specifically, because it's visual, we can also assess, for example, the movement of the person, the facial expressions. Radio definitely is also has high trust, especially in rural areas. So like what Dr. Ronald mentioned earlier, we should consider radio. No, maybe we can increase our efforts there. SNS is social networking sites. There has been an increase in 2021. Online news sites also increase. So a lot of the digital platforms, no, the trust rating there increased. For newspapers, that also increased. Magazines, not so. There's also an increase, although there are less magazines now. For blogs, it's towards the end of the ranking, but there was also an increase, and then podcasts also is experiencing an increase in trust rating. So for for the population who have access to podcasts, they that's also an approach that can be considered. So I'm gonna stop here, but but just looking at all those information and the best practices also, there is still a lot of opportunity, and there are best practices that we can follow and apply to our nutrition specific campaign. And definitely agree with the other speakers that having an evidence-based campaign, campaign, yeah, correct, will allow us to have a more effective SBCC campaign moving forward. So I'll end my session there. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Vicky. It was really a very interesting discussion, particularly the element of trust. I think that's very important to sustain the efforts that we do for changing behavior. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to request Dr. Marilyn Daguila to join me in the question and answer portion. I think we do have several questions on the line. Please, Doc Marilyn, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I do have some questions if you don't mind. Yes, many of you speakers, thank you very much, by the way, for a very, what do you call, it's quite engaging, and thought-provoking, actually. Your presentations were really thought-provoking. The thing is, you always mention that the enabling environment, is critical. And the context in which SBCC takes place is almost everything, at least to me. Because how do you enable people, women, children, and men, to act on information they get, to change their behaviors when there are barriers, financial, geographical, gender, physical, and even administrative, to access food or health services, for instance? That's one. Now, my other question to you is, how do you measure the results that you achieve? And how do you sustain those desirable changes in behavior? Then the third is, could SBCC be disease when SBCC takes a long time to change behaviors? And then the fourth is this. You talked about conflicting messages from different sources. And, well, we have fake news, fake data. We have several of these. For instance, a promotion of bottle, vape smoking, juice that is so food. And these all go against healthy eating and healthy living in general. How do you counter this? This is for any of you.
I guess
Shall we
I can get
start with
started.
Ronald? Please?
Yeah. I thank Dr. Marlon. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot of questions. I can address one of them. I think to underscore, I think an important point that was shared, I think, by all the three of us, is that SBCC is a piece of the bigger puzzle of interventions, right? So this is one piece that could help nudge, whatever behavior we're trying to change, in addition to, as you say, the enabling environment, to obviously policies. For example, just to highlight a data from the Bambina project, many of the mothers and our household said that we recognize the importance of vegetables and fruits and eating healthy, but we can't afford it, right? So the knowledge seems to be there, the awareness of good and food nutrition is there, but I can't buy it, right? I can't afford it, my husband doesn't work, so forth and so on. So the environment there already is a significant barrier, which is why partnerships with other sectors, right, government, private sector, so forth and so on, is necessary so that those other conditions, right, the affordability of the food, the access to the food, is also being addressed while you're doing your communication angle or a communication piece of the puzzle. So I think SBCC, we want to underscore, is not the end all, if you will, or it's not, you know, it's only a piece of that intervention. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ronald. Maybe Noor or Vicky can also respond to that.
Yeah, I can just add to what Dr. Ronald has mentioned. While we have, enabling environment is a very crucial element. And nowadays, you see a lot of governments actually in various countries. I can give you an example of Bangladesh, where there is a phase-wise study that is being done, where behavior change communication has been integrated into the social protection system. So it is called the Maternal Child Health Benefit Program. And there is WFP is part of this program, providing the technical assistance and ensuring the behavior change communication. And IFPRI has been doing the study phase-wise to see how the behavior change in this particular target audience that we have been working with has impacted in their behavior. So it is important that, you know, like you start looking at programs which are more coherent, which actually, if we are talking about behavior change, social behavior change communication, as I said, if we are working, we want to work with this specific vulnerable population. When we are doing the formative research itself, we will know the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is poverty, then communication is not going to change anything. So you need to design your intervention in a way that your communication will move into the space only when your policy aspects have been put in place. So once the cash, if there is, say, for example, a cash transfer program, so as the cash transfer program is being designed, you need to design your social behavior change communication. It's important who the cash is also being received by. Is it a man or a woman? And your design of your communication will change again. So, and you need to also have other factors that with the cash, what are you expecting this population to do? So you need to have different programs that fit together the puzzle and assess the change in attitude of people to buying specific foods. So that's how you actually bring in the, you know, to understand the change. So that specific population, you're putting in the cash-based transfer, you're bringing in the social behavior change communication, and then you bring in your monitoring and evaluation in a way that you have a baseline and end line, which assesses the knowledge, attitude, and practice of, if you're talking about buying that healthy food. So this is, you know, how we see as an enabling environment. And yeah, M&E is a very important aspect in behavior change communication, and it actually becomes very expensive. It's as expensive as a project implementation, because, you know, you have to do a formative research, then you do a baseline, then you have to constantly have a feedback mechanism to see if what you're doing is working or not. Then you actually go into doing, if it is a 5-year project, you actually get into a midline to understand where you are. You need to change the course of action. And then you go into an end line. So usually you need to have an agency that captures all these aspects. So it has to be a very strong intervention with a specific objective in mind. Hence you keep saying that the enabling environment is important, just the communication is not important. I hope that answers most of that question. Over.
Thank you, Noor. And maybe we would like to hear from Vicky as well.
Sure. Well, in terms of the enabling environment, I think we have a great opportunity now going into the 2022 elections, actually. We've seen some medical groups actually share a health agenda to the various presidential candidates. Why not also present a health agenda that includes a nutrition aspect? Most likely, the Department of Health might have that, and see, but a consolidated nutrition message coming from various organizations and actors that could also attract attention of our running candidates, and even if they don't, if they don't apply it or they don't take notice of it, but I'm sure they will. It could be something that definitely will gain media attention, especially if it's a lot of groups actually forwarding that type of message. So while it might not have that immediate impact of having that enabling environment, but at least we will get that attention that we do need this. And perhaps since COVID is still sort of the primary concern right now, and well, nutrition is still actually very much tied to the health of the population, to the economic success. Tying it there and is a one way also to get the attention of the those who are in charge of making sure that we have an enabling environment. Definitely agree with the M&E. For our stakeholders, they will want to see some short-term success, that midterm and the long-term measures that will be something that they would want to see, and specific agenda as well. In terms of the conflicting messages, yes, that is quite a challenging topic, but perhaps that strong message from the nutrition practitioners or the community or the professionals, having a strong message there would also gain that attention of our regulators or the policymakers.
Right. Thank you so much for that
Well, thank
responses
you.
from them, from our resource persons. Doc Marilyn, I have a very interesting question here from our audience. I think it's going to be responded to by either Doc Ronald and maybe Vicky as well. The question is, has SBCC ever been used for middle class or citizens higher on the social ladder
Right.
for food? What projects have been considered to impact this area, especially as the country is known for its food wastage? Example, Noche Buena or feasting. The person is asking because the social inequality component is very important to see food from a systems thinking approach. And further, especially in some Filipinos who resort actually to pagpag or the food wastage, no? Because it is either what they're using or eating, or what is most accessible to them. So any of you?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. That's a great question. To my knowledge, and mind you, SBCC here in the Philippines is only starting to grow, right? It's an exciting subject matter, but it's only starting to grow. I'm not aware of any SBCC sort of initiatives or projects that specifically focus on sort of the upper strata of the social, the socioeconomic class, if you will. In part, I imagine, because given the limited resources before us and the extent of other problems regarding food and nutrition, you can imagine that while, of course, there are other problems when you're talking about childhood malnutrition, which is very chronic and has been an issue for many years now, especially down in Barm and Maguindanao. The focus of SBCC, at least with regards to food and nutrition, is focused on malnutrition, especially targeting the needs of children under 5 and pregnant and lactating women. So that's not to say, of course, that there are other people in other groups don't have needs. Of course they do. It's just that I'm not aware that that's a project or an initiative that's been highlighted. But to be absolutely, inequality, of course, is an issue. What does changing the behavior of those groups will do to help the behaviors of other people in that ladder, right? So I think that's a good question. Thank you. No easy answer.
Great. Any additional from Vicky, perhaps?
Same. I have not actually seen or heard of any SBCC campaign directed towards that part of the population. I'm thinking for the same answer. It's because, for example, like we are working with the NNC, and the priority is really the more vulnerable groups and the others. So those are the priority, and not necessarily those other groups. Yeah.
Thank you, Vicky. Doc Marilyn, is there anything else from your side? Or maybe while waiting for Doc Marilyn, there's another question actually here. Actually, this is linked up to the 2022 elections. How can SBCC be harnessed to create an environment of nutrition performance expectations of candidates running for the office? I think this is fit for Vicky, perhaps, as you already alluded to election a while ago, Vicky.
Yes. Well, like I mentioned, having a consolidated statement, for example, that provides, for example, the evidence from the various groups about the impact of nutrition, and also using that evidence to build a strong agenda, could be something that could it could be sort of like an open letter, and then something that could be forwarded to the specific groups that are running now. But the intention really there, I think the message would be is to have an overall universal message for nutrition, that it should be a priority, along with the other health issues of the country, because it will help address the concerns that we have now, to make sure that the population is healthy, that we can work, that our economy can recover. That's nutrition is part of that equation. So that message could be part of that and the evidence that we have, the research could be part of that paper, for example, that we submit.
Right. Thank you so much. And we have a message here from Captain Dean Baez. And he said that we support your program. We in the global maritime industry through MLC Manila 2010 Convention confirms the importance to act now on health and hygiene issues of labor forces, especially nutrition. We also handle transport in bulk food raw materials globally. Thank you so much, Captain Dean, for that message from yours. So perhaps in the interest of time, we can still cover two more questions, maybe from the audience. Dr. Marina, is there anything else from your side?
No, I see here a lot of us 6 questions from the audience.
Okay.
The elections, and then the Bambina project. I think they've been covered, no?
Okay, yes. Maybe here, Doc Marilyn, from my side, maybe a question to Noor. In your capacity as SBCC advisor at the regional level, what challenges or roadblocks did you notice for the country offices facing when they wish to do SBCC projects?
Thank you, Dr. Martin, for the question. Yeah, I think um, it's very varied, if you ask me, depending on where you are based. Like in some countries, if you see in Asia, SPCC is a very strong area for many countries, and a lot of other agencies are already doing it. Whereas in some countries, it's a very new topic. So it's more about technical capacity development, which range from governments, partners, and the other is engaging donors to undertake such projects, because a lot of times funding for a longer term initiative becomes very challenging. So we end up trying to do pilots, and at the same time we don't have the capacity or the skill, or in a country to do the work. So we may not find the agencies, or we may not find an SPCC officer. Like Philippines is a dream team that is very rare in in WFP, where all the combination comes together. But yeah, that's been a challenge in many of the countries, and it also depends on how the governments are also interested in taking this initiative. And I was very fortunate to work with Brenda in Sri Lanka, and where the government really took the work, and even the country offices managed to scale the work to a national level campaign. So I think it is very varied. The biggest challenge is resources, engaging donors, and capacity development, both from the government point of view. Also, it is important, like you need to understand SPCC well to do it, to deliver it, and monitoring and evaluation. If we are not able to capture what we are doing, is very difficult, is very difficult to understand. And in WFP, we are now slowly moving into the process, starting to pilot with some countries on taking few knowledge, attitude, practice questions and putting it into the M&E systems. And we will do it with the countries and test it out and see how we can, continue to integrate it and not make it too cumbersome in the process, rather than having a separate M&E initiative to take this. So that's where I am.
Absolutely, Nor. And that's true. While we are doing research, I think we also need to look at another enabling environment. Like, for example, the comment here from the chat box of our colleague, that farmers should be provided seeds by the local government unit, particularly next year is election time already, so that they can plant in their land and, of course, different fruits and vegetables, and as a good source of nutrition. Well, thank you so much for that. And maybe oh, yeah. I can see here Brenda is also raising. Maybe Brenda, you would like to speak something about your experience in Sri Lanka as well?
Thanks. Well, Noor sort of refreshed my mind. There was a really great example in Sri Lanka, and it was one of those things that we didn't design, but if I could redesign it, I would. And I'm saying this because we have so many participants on the line today for us to all be thinking. So I had learned in Sri Lanka that there was an Australia-funded program for vocational training, and it was designed to try to encourage people, especially women in marginalized areas of Sri Lanka, to enter into the hospitality industry. And this was an area of the country where it was quite hard to get women to come into the workforce. Thus, the Australians were trying to foster this vocational training and also to increase the quality of the hospitality industry, because they were trying to bring them in to become chefs in hotels. So after I heard that their incentive modality was a TV program, it was a Master Chef type program in a contest where they had a short list, of course, every week of chefs coming in, and it was something that was jazzy, and therefore people wanted to participate. And I heard about that, and when they were deciding to do a second year of this Master Chef TV type program, it was called Supreme Chef, I said, hey, why can't we incorporate nutrition as while you're doing it? Can we not layer in nutrition messaging? Can we have a doctor come in, but in a good way to give nutrition messages? Can we do the measuring, as Noor was discussing, around it? So we created a package, and it was really low cost for us because the show was already planned. It added extra oomph to the program, and it also gave the viewers important nutrition information, as well as the chefs that were going out into the hospitality industry. They were now more equipped with knowing about nutrition. So it was like a win-win for everyone. And I really love to see if there could be opportunities to work more collaboratively together here in the Philippines on such projects. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brenda, for sharing your experience. Well, we do have a lot of questions actually coming in from our audience. We will try our best to respond to that, but maybe to later in a separate venue. But at this time around, in the interest of time, I would like to thank our panel of resource persons, Dr. Marilen Dagilan as well with me today, Noor, Dr. Ronald, and Vicky, and of course, a special participation from our country director, Brenda. Thank you so much. It was really very engaging discussion this morning. And at this point, allow me to proceed with the awarding of certificate of appreciation to our speakers. Would like to request our team to kindly flash the certificate of recognition. I'll read to you the citation. The certificate of recognition is presented to Ms. Noor Abubakar, Regional Social and Behavioral Change Communication Specialist, WFP Regional Bureau in Bangkok, for your valuable participation as one of the panelists for the webinar entitled Why We Eat What We Eat, the WFP Social and Behavior Change Communication Project, awarded the 7th day of December 2021. Signed, Dr. Brenda Barton, Representative and Country Director, World Food Program Philippines, and Dr. Marilen Dagilan, Executive Director, Philippine Center for Population and Development. The same goes to Dr. Ronald Del Castillo, and of course to Ms. Vicky Antoinette Luta from ION. Thank you so much for your time today.
Martin, hey Martin,
Yes.
told me that you're going to, show this certification, I could have made my handwriting more legible.
Don't worry, Doc. Yeah, next time around. So with
Next
that,
time.
thank you so much for all your time attending this very successful
Yeah,
and
thank you very
insightful
much.
discussions. And thanks likewise to our
I learned
PCPD
so much.
partner. All right.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Okay.
Have a good day,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Initially known as the Population Center Foundation, the Philippine Center for Population and Development was created in 1973 to complement the government's National Population Program. In its first 26 years, PCF implemented projects that delivered information, training, and family planning services. In 1992, the foundation broadened its mandate from population to Population and Development, or PopDev, and it changed its name to the Philippine Center for Population and Development. As a PopDev organization, PCPD implemented projects on community-based health education and services, responsible parenting, in 2000, PCPD was reorganized as a grant-giving foundation. It supported the efforts of partners that responded to various concerns, such as housing, waste management, food security, climate change, and reproductive health. In 2020, PCPD decided to shift from giving grants to becoming a social enterprise. It is studying the feasibility of setting up a hospital that would specialize on women's and children's health care, while at the same time provide a broad range of health services to the general public. As it continues to evolve, one thing has remained constant for PCPD. Through its various transformations, PCPD's commitment is to contribute to improve the quality of life of Filipinos.